Hello, everyone. This is Xander, Director of Marketing Operations with CS2 Marketing. This is the Forward Thinking Podcast. Today, I am being joined by our special guest, Crissy. Crissy, how are you doing today?
Good. Is everyone tired of hearing about me as the special guest, or until this baby comes, I'm just going to be the special guest. I like that.
Exactly. We'll get plenty of Crissy before the baby comes, and then we're gonna miss you for so long.
I know. I know. I'll
We'll
have to do a special with a newborn. I'm sure there's a
Yes.
lot of parallels with I can tap into for a podcast episode.
I'm looking forward to that topic. Parallels between newborns and new marketing automation platforms.
Yeah.
Well, awesome. So Crissy, today we are going to be talking about communication orchestration, especially as it pertains to technology, right? People are getting a lot more tools to help facilitate communicating with our end users. You've got marketing automation, you have sales engagement platforms, the products sending out messaging, you have chat platforms, customer success is doing a bunch of stuff. And, gone are the days of just managing your marketing automation platform as a marketing ops professional. You have to be thinking about how all of these tools are working together. Otherwise, you risk overwhelming all of your buyers and overwhelming your customers with too much information or conflicting information. And it can just be a lot. So today, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be talking about how people can go about improving their setup and improving their administration. So that way they're looking at all of these tools in a holistic manner and not working within a silo.
Yep. I love it. Let's get into it.
I'm into it. So Crissy, just in case if we don't know already, what is communication orchestration?
Yeah, so we tried to come up with a term for this, and I feel like communication orchestration was the best thing because when it comes to how we're communicating to our prospects and customers, there's different channels, right? There's email, there's phone, there's SMS, there's social media messages. For the most part, the most common ones are email and phone, right? When we think about the ways that we communicate, marketing's usually sending out emails. Sales is probably also sending out email, but also calling. And so there's a strong reliancy on that channel. But there's also, like you mentioned, just so many other channels that you can communicate with a prospect or customer. And to them, they see that as all just one experience. Like, how is this, company communicating with me? And so really when we think about it, I think a lot of people think about these channels like very singularly. They think about them as like one team sending them. And oftentimes with that way of thinking, you're missing out the, really holistic view, like you mentioned, of like what actually is happening. Like, how is this prospect or customer actually being communicated as a whole? I think you and I probably have, common examples, but I've had ones where I'm a customer and I'm receiving, emails from a salesperson, but at the same time I'm added to some nurture, and then the product is telling me messages. And sometimes I've even, received like a social message thinking that like I'm not even engaged with the company. And so that's just the example of like the communications, but the orchestration of it all together is really how that, user or how that experience, plays with each other, like almost doing kind of like a air traffic controlling of it. That's good orchestration.
Yeah.
Bad orchestration, like you can imagine, like a symphony is when one is outshining the other. They're just not working together. It's not creating this like perfect, song or experience, like I would say, for the prospect. It's really, just crappy. And that can
Right.
happen very easily.
There's a big difference between going to a professional symphony and going to a seventh grade orchestra. And sometimes you can think about that as it pertains to this orchestration as well, right?
Yeah, I'm sure there's some seventh grade orchestras that are good out there, but yeah, for the most part, it's there's a trombone that needs a little bit of
A little bit of
tuning or
tuning.
something, but yeah.
Exactly. No, that's fantastic. I would agree. And our buyers and our customers, they don't think about this is organization A's marketing team versus the sales team. It's just organization A, right? And
Right.
when you get frustrated by communication, they're not getting frustrated with an individual team, they're getting frustrated with the brand.
Totally.
And it's just such a great aspect for us to be able to focus on to improve that customer experience, which we've been talking about a little bit in previous podcasts.
Mhm.
So why is it important? We kind of alluded
Mhm.
to, why it can be problematic, but why is it important? And what's happening now when it's not being orchestrated super well?
Yeah. So, I mean, we talk about this a lot on the podcast, but I think a big part of like revenue growth and where we focus our projects on, like as operators, is around the customer experience. And when you think about communication, orchestration, that's a huge part of the customer experience. If anything, it like is the customer experience,
Yeah,
like
that in a
beside
nutshell.
besides them doing their own research on your website and things like that. Yes, that's part of the experience as well, or campaigns. But like even the communication that you even run from campaigns is part of that orchestration. And so it is a huge part of the customer journey. So if there's one place that you really want to focus and make sure it's, on point, it is this, because like it can be a differentiator, as we talked about before. But a good customer experience can be the difference between winning and losing a deal, because you're just like, well, if I'm being handled this way as a prospect, what's it going to be like when I'm a customer, or a customer who's like, I can't, like, I don't know anything that's really going on within the product, or I'm not getting communicated as a customer the right way. And no one reaches out to me until like my deal, my renewal is about to come up. That's, that's a poor experience too. But, that can also impact your revenue. So, I mean, number one, you can tie this literally back to your customer experience. And so that's why it's important. And then I think why it's important for operators to focus on it now. I think you definitely alluded to it, but it's just gotten more complicated. And the reason why it's gotten more complicated is because there's just, more channels for it, more platforms, more just like avenues for communicating to a prospect or customer. And I think a lot of the time those teams are still pretty siloed. So like the marketing, sales, and customer product team are not always aligned on like how they want to communicate to a prospect, how they even are. They are given their own goals and then they execute against it. And a lot of the
Mhm.
time that communication or those channels are part of that strategy, but they're not thinking about, okay, well, how does this all kind of play with each other? So a salesperson will potentially just, reach out to a bunch of prospects and add them to an outreach sequence or groove or, sales loft. And while at the same time, marketing's adding them to campaigns and a nurture stream. And then maybe the SDR did reach out because they signed up for a free trial. Well, now they're in like a free trial kind of email cadence, or they're receiving messages like every day from the product in like an inbox there or something, which happens, and so it just it kind of becomes a bit confusing to the prospect. Also, I think it can seem like you're over communicating to a prospect or customer, or sometimes even like under communicating, because no one's aligned on like, well, are we even missing any communication lines, like,
Yeah.
because it's just not getting to the customer or prospect when it needs to, or there's assumptions that it's happening, which also happens too. Um, so I think because of this, it really kind of needs alignment, needs ownership, because we could be sending out duplicative messages, which is probably the one that looks the worst, I would say. Like if you're someone who is getting like similar messages from like three different people and places and stuff like that, like that becomes annoying as a prospector. And then it becomes very confusing because sometimes also those messages conflict with each other. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean it's equally bad when it's duplicative or when it is contradictory of each other. Either way,
Yeah.
and you know that it's not being communicated internally effectively. And it's just that's a chip on the block, right?
Yeah.
Um I can't help but think too, like it's as much about timing and channels as it is about message. And so,
Mhm.
what we're talking about here, it sounds very, very much like single product, single message. It can be confusing. Now, add on top of that, I have two products that I'm selling, or I have two different
Oh, yeah.
verticals that I'm selling into with different messaging, and it can go even more haywire. And you need kind of all of those underlying processes in place to make that type of stuff really work.
Totally. I think it's like underestimated, to be honest. Especially when you have like different product lines, like you mentioned, or different paths that like or journeys that you can go down. I know we've talked about in the past, the things to look out for when adopting PLG when you're sales led. Like some of that, you see those conflictions just there. Like you think that you have someone flagged as someone who is on a sales led path and they're receiving those messages, and then they'll get another path with being in your product, and there's no like real kind of handoff, I would say, or path to like kind of process that and change it. So it does require a lot of insight into what is happening. And I don't think that companies should go like too overboard in complicating things, but I think at least at the start aligning on like how you're communicating, reaching out to prospects and customers, what are kind of like your evergreen kind of like like streams and channels of which you're doing that, and then who owns the like the tools and the channels for sending that out. Because I think in some cases you need to be aligned whenever you want to add on to this, right? But I think a lot of time like teams will usually like pass off ownership of those tools, or like the governance is not high. And then I think right now, and I'm assuming I get spam like crazy right now. Like so I think that email channel is being, you see this when times are tough, right? Like free channels are just abused like crazy.
Hardcore. Yeah.
And I think a lot of marketing or sales teams think of those channels as free. But what I say free is not, there's no such thing as free for anything good. Like there's going to be a cost associated. And that the downfall of that is like you are probably pissing off your prospects, and like just an overabundance or over like use of certain channels doesn't mean more. Like more is not more. It's about
No.
communicating in a way that's really helpful to your prospect and customer, and that makes sense. So at the same time, I think what we're likely going to see even more is less governance, more of a reliance on certain communication channels. And then with everyone like turning over and leaving, it probably means that there's wanting to pass off ownership. And so what that means is like no one's owning it a lot of the time, because everyone's going to like hot potato it. And you see this a lot with like sales engagement platforms because it's being used for a certain purpose and goal. But when it comes to governance and like how you're actually using it, and there's a lot of leeway you can give teams to use it, you can use it almost like a marketing automation platform, that it will be done. And we see this happen a lot, and that's what leads to like even worse, communication orchestration.
Yeah, I feel like as these orchestration tools have matured, the marketing and the sales actual messaging has gotten worse. You know,
Mm-hmm.
as somebody who's receiving the emails, like, that it's a robot, and it
Yeah.
doesn't work well, right? But
Yeah.
you're putting in as much effort as possible to convert these valuable people that get into your funnel, right? And we always
Mm-hmm.
think very internally when it comes to a funnel, but we're not thinking externally of like, what is that buyer's experience right now?
Mm-hmm.
And, I've had conversations with people in the past where they're like, well, who cares if they unsubscribe? And I'm like, who cares? Like, you just
Yeah.
lost the ability to directly market and sell to this individual because they said, the dollar's up and I'm not going to spend my money with you anymore in terms of my inbox space. And that's where that free channel is no longer free.
Totally. And I think I can never tell if I'm just biased because I'm a marketer, but like bad marketing to me just like really like will just lose my trust like instantly. I'm pretty forgiving though. Like if someone makes a mistake and uses the wrong token and blah blah blah, like whatever, that's fine. But I'll be forgiving. But like when I'm just being like over communicated to. I'm being spammed off the bat. I'm a customer and then I'm like receiving like emails about like net new product stuff like that to me. I'll just be like, if they don't have that together, then why am I going to give my money to this company? Like, how am I actually going to be treated? And so sometimes you figure that out once you're a customer and you're like, oh, great. Like, but as a prospect, it really does leave a lasting impression. And I don't think it's only marketers that are sensitive to that. If anything, prospects who aren't marketers might not have the sympathy to know like how challenging it is to do. People just think, oh, in this day and age, there's automation for that, right? There's,
Yeah.
they should know who I am. They should know everything about me. Like, but really, we know that can be a different story.
Yeah, that's more difficult than you think that it is, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
So if I wanted to tackle this problem, like, what would you recommend? Where should I start? Where should I start to try and tackle this orchestration problem?
Yeah, I think first step, because yeah, this seems overwhelming, right? Like if someone's listening, they're like, "Oh, where do I start?"
And it
And like,
can be, and that's a-okay, right?
yeah, and don't shy away from things that are overwhelming. Like, I think it's good to know that, like, if this is a big initiative, like it feels big because it is big and it's important. So it's like starting with a plan. So I think the first thing, especially if you're just one team, and maybe you only own two of those channels, right? You own the marketing automation platform, you own the CRM. You should probably be working with other teams that use those other channels, but at least you could start the project yourself. And the first thing to do is just document what's happening today. So these tools will let you see that a lot of the time. So you document like, okay, what are some of the most actively used sequences, how are they set up, um, run a report of like activities sent from the sales team, how often are those being done, and then on the marketing side do the same thing. One place that if it's a lot, I would say start with like your inbound chat, like an inbound lead. What happens to them when they come through? Because those are your most like valuable prospects. So someone who comes through your website, do a little secret shopping if you can, or look at what's happened recently for a few of those leads and document. Start to say, okay, how many emails have they received? What you can also see activities being logged like straight from like Marketo and HubSpot a lot of the time because it's logging
Mhm.
those activities. And so you can see that all happening in a timeline. Like start there. That's a good documentation place. And then see like, are there overlaps? What's also happening like that you don't see there potentially within the product? Maybe you need to have a conversation with or customer success or something like that, with those teams. But I think first starting with your inbound like channel is a good place to start, and then seeing where there's overlap. Or if you do have like a very high converting channel, so say you do run a product led motion, we've actually done this for our clients before, but that's where like a ton of orchestration is usually needed, and it's actually less orchestration. So we actually did an audit and worked with a client one time at CS2 where they had like a freemium trial. But these people could also be people who could purchase, their regular product. And so what we saw is we started to document, okay, this is what's happening. And we started to map out like on one side of the axis, we had a path for what platform is sending out these emails. And then we had on the horizontal, like what's the cadence or how many messages were sent over time. From those channels or those teams. And we saw there was so much overlap. Like they were added to a nurture. They were added also to a get started stream just for the trial. They then went into an outreach sequence. I got a ton of emails from the implementation team. They also were being sent a weekly webinar about how to use their trial, like invite. And so until they registered for that, they just kept on getting invited to it. And then they also had like a success team reaching out to them at some point throughout the journey once they hit a certain milestone. And then that added on, but sometimes also conflicted with other messages. So we actually, once we documented that, we then assessed, okay, well, what could be trimmed down? What could be turned off? What conflicts with each other? And then can we actually define just milestones for when this communication can happen instead of them all just triggering at the same time? But having that documentation is what led that conversation. And it was just that specific source, but it was a really high converting and important kind of source of leads for them. And so I do suggest maybe if you feel like it's too overwhelming, start with that. Start with that first, and then figure out how you can then build a plan, to beyond that. And so so I talked about the first one is documentation. The second, I would say, and what happens around the same time, is like aligning the teams and assign ownership of the orchestration. So if you're doing at the same time, you want to kind of make the case for why these teams should, be invested in this. And that's usually like sales, marketing, customer success. And see like if there can be some ownership of that platform and channel when it comes to the orchestration. So like if anything new needs to be added, that they're communicating back to the team, and really kind of like maintaining that governance there.
That's fantastic. I mean, having, as you say, visualizing it is so key for people. Don't let this be a spreadsheet. Like a spreadsheet doesn't hit the same way as spelling something out in a flow chart where everybody, like you could show that to a CFO or a CEO or a CMO and everybody at the same time is going to go, oh, wow, I understand what the problem statement is now. So having that, I remember that visual that you're talking about. It registered with me personally because I'm like, oh, this is such a useful exercise for anybody to go through. And then pulling in the right teams, because now that starts to get the head of the SDR team thinking about it and saying, oh, I am sending out a lot of messages through my sales engagement platform. Bringing in the customer team, because that chart that you're putting together might be a first time prospect, but you have the same problem statement for the first time that your customer closes their first deal or right after their first renewal or at any point, right? So you can really start to think about what are these journeys at those big milestones, and, not just have to stop at, okay, I got them through my nurture, which, typically when we're thinking about how much work we have on our plates, we tend to think much more of like brand new prospect.
Yeah, definitely. And I think once you've aligned the teams and assigned ownership, or maybe it's even like the MOPS team is like owning it as part of, or, a MOPS person on a revenue ops team, you still want to have like kind of your key stakeholders. And the reason why we want to do that is kind of like our main tip, our third tip, which is around defining the rules of engagement, because this would translate like just overall like how the teams would like inform their strategy. So like how are teams actually going to engage with a prospect or customer, and documenting that, and then also kind of like sticking to those rules, because that'll make it easy for not creating conflicts in the future. So some examples of rules that you can like define is like context sales, leads only, they only get responded to directly from SDR sales when it comes to an actual follow-up, like a one-to-one follow-up. So none of that, like none of those messaging come from marketing. Marketing, yes, can still nurture them and nurture on behalf of like marketing, like sending them best practices or, selling value points. But when it comes to like a one-on-one message, that would come from sales. And this sounds so simple. You're like, well, yeah, no, duh. But I've seen cases where they thought that was happening, but then their marketing automation platform was sending a one-to-one email from someone thinking that like, oh, sales isn't reaching out fast enough. So we put this email in, and or maybe they have an automated welcome email that no one knew about, and it's still kind of confusing because like it's also then promoting signing up to contact sales when they just did, so I think having that rule of engagement is like an example. And then other ones are just kind of overall rules, like setting up communication limits. You could definitely do this on the market automation platform side, but you can also do it some governance on your other platforms around like how many sequences you can be at one time. Defining like maybe SDRs or sales reps can't send any batch or blast emails from a sales engagement platform. Like it only can be like one-to-one. So not having any automated like sequences or anything like that where everything just goes on its own. There's no manual intervention. There's no someone kicking it off. And I actually we suggest this a lot because it just kind of defeats the purpose of having a sales engagement platform. You might as well just send all those emails directly from your marketing automation platform, because there's no customization, there's no insight into who you're actually emailing, there's nothing. So why do that from those tools? And then a few other ones are, SDRs and sales can only contact prospects who are opted in or meet opt-in language. But just making things really clear there, because sometimes that happens and they don't even include opt-in language. So this is definitely something to look into.
Yeah.
And then maybe marketing also owns the nurturing of a prospect with content only, like from marketing. So anything that comes from marketing comes from the brand. Anything that comes from sales or a product team or a CS team comes from an actual person. And that also seems like very like, no duh, but no, that like make that really clear in your rules of engagement. Because then that will define making sure that those messages like aren't conflicting with each other by default. Marketing's not going to send out like something that looks like it's coming from sales or promoting certain things a certain way. And so then the communication then becomes complementary instead of contradictory or competing with one another.
And thinking about like where they're at in the journey of like, if you have a life cycle in place, if there's open opportunities, defining rules of, does marketing message while there's an open opportunity? Do they pause any sort of messaging while it's in an open opportunity? I think that the more aligned that a sales and marketing team can be of like, what is that message? Because marketing can provide a lot of value in that space. And I feel like a lot of salespeople are like, don't touch my lead, don't touch my opportunity. But if you can come together and come up with a rule together that both people have like some skin in the game, I think it can go a long way, and you can help to supplement what the sales team is doing. But if you haven't established that and you haven't set up those rules of engagement, you can just build a lot of confusion and a lot of conflict.
Totally. Totally. And I like what you're saying too. And one thing that we didn't have on here, but I was thinking about is also maybe building a plan for supporting these rules of engagement, giving all the teams visibility. Because
Yeah.
one thing you can train your SDRs or sales team on is also like how to get insight into communications that are going out. Like there's, plugins within your CRM, like from HubSpot or Marketo, they can see a history of emails being sent.
Mm-hmm.
And then at the same time, marketing, hey, this is how you can see what's being sent out from your sales engagement platform or Gainsight, to customers or whatnot. So I think the education piece for the other teams too, to get insight into what the other team is doing, I think can be really valuable. And then training those teams so that they know, so I think knowledge is helpful, especially for people who are trying to communicate in the best way to a prospect or customer. It's like, okay, well, what else is going out to them,
Right.
But it also eases the like you said, sometimes sales can be like, don't email an MQL. It's like, what do you mean? Like, we want to like run campaigns against them. Like we want to nurture these folks and stuff like that. And so being really clear of like the type of email that marketing sending out, and then maybe where they can see, get visibility into that, I think could ease the minds of that team.
Yeah, definitely would agree with that. So if you have this rules of engagement, what are you doing to enforce it or make sure that, people are actually aware that this thing even exists?
Yeah. So this is why I feel like it needs like kind of a team around it. But if you're leading it, I think the first thing is, now that you've defined your rules of engagement, create a plan for how you're going to maybe make updates to what's existing to match those rules of engagement, and work as that small working group to kind of slowly put in those changes. At the same time, you then want to document your rules of engagement and then also maintain documentation. So this includes like tools, teams, streams of communication that are in place. And we want to make sure it's something that can be easily updated, but is also like visible. So there's different ways you could probably go about doing this in the best way. But like you said, something visual is really helpful, like using tools like Whimsical or something like that, where you can actually embed images and different streams and things, is really useful. But think about your audience too. Maybe for people on the CRM side, maybe they don't see all those journeys. Maybe that's something that marketing and the different teams on the platform see. But maybe for them, it's like some type of calendar or something, or
Mm-hmm.
just showing them where they can see communications going out, and then having just a list of what the rules of engagement are. So what's pertaining to their role. Like, so only give people the information that's really going to be useful to them. So you might have different documentation for different groups. Like, yes, we're going to maintain this air traffic control documentation, the streams and stuff for the operating teams who support it. But for the actual like end users, maybe they just have a quick like short summary of like when and how to engage whatever audience that they are usually talking to, and also and visibility into a calendar or types of communication that's also being sent to the prospect or customer, and how they can see that, because those are the two things that will help them really. They don't need to know everything.
Yeah.
And then think about how you want to translate this for campaigns versus evergreen communications. Like campaigns do really well on a calendaring, where evergreen can be like mapped out in your kind of streams and communication. And like don't over architect it. Like think about like what's actually going to be the most useful, and just prevent problems from happening. Because sometimes the rules that you put in place and the plans you put in place should be addressing the problems, or being a good solution, rather than like just document everything for documentation's sake.
Yeah.
So what's going to be useful, and then moving forward, it's all about maintenance and iteration. So put in a request process for each team who's working on like these communication tools or different streams. And so everyone can approve and align on it. This involves even adding a new communication line. So say you're like, oh, we're going to test out doing SMS or something. That's something that should be agreed upon. Like, do we even have opt-ins for that? Like,
Right.
how are you planning to do that? I've been getting like text messages from like cold text messages recently, and there's
Oof.
nothing worse to me, honestly. No.
No. I have a hard enough time
Yeah.
enjoying that when I've actually opted into it.
Right. So if like, that type of request, like that could come up in like an SDR meeting. They're like, the way that I'm going to try and get to my prospect is not calling them. I'm going to text them. It's like, people need to know about that, like it needs to not be some like rogue channel that gets put in place, because there's a lot of, like you said, there's also a lot of things that come with that around hurting your brand or the prospect, and really like adding on a poor experience to that, and that could just totally erase all the goodness happening from other teams too.
Yeah, absolutely. So as we start to wrap up this conversation, what are some of the wins that we could expect to come out of having a well-established communication plan and rules of engagement around that?
Yeah, so I think when I've been thinking about projects, it's like we talked about the what, we're building a communication orchestration, and then like how we do that. We've talked a lot of ways about how you can do that, which I know have been very high level, but honestly, it really depends on your organization. So if you do have more questions, you can reach out to us at CS, at our website, or, message me or some, Xander on the team, and we can answer some of those directed questions. But the third thing that we always want to think about is like outcomes, and like we call those wins as part of our growth framework. And so the wins that you can really, try and, because you're going to need resources, you need to get people aligned, you need to evangelize, like, why should we work on this together? Right. And so really it's the improved customer experience. This is a customer experience. That's what we talked about. You're going to have like less people unsubscribe, like you said. Like that doesn't seem like a big deal, but it is. Like that's the difference between communicating to someone versus not communicating to them in some ways, because email is such a reliant channel. And then when you do have someone opted in, like that's precious. That's what you should be focusing on, like how to really engage people who are opted in rather than pissing them off, and then also at the same time pissing people who aren't opted in. And then better email engagement and overall customer engagement, which is something that CMOs are always thinking about, like how can we improve our engagement overall? And then really like the other two are very like you can be measured anecdotally, but like happy customers and prospects, because like they're bought into how you're communicating to them. They're well communicated to. They don't feel in the dark at the same time. And then the last one, it's the competitive advantage, like I talked about. This could like win you more deals if you're doing this well versus your competitor.
Yeah.
Like Charlie and I have said this on the podcast before. I think we talked about you, Xander. I think as a team, all of us have sometimes even made decisions on technology on behalf of our client, ourselves, and our personal lives, just based on how good the communication was. Because if someone doesn't answer us, or we're getting conflicting information, it's like it doesn't fill us with confidence. So we're gonna like go with the company, because sometimes it's splitting hairs between like what the product is doing. And so it's the one that you trust, the one that's communicating to you well, the one that's creating a good customer experience, that sometimes can win the deal.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, all of this is I always think of like this outbound communication as like the breadth of an organization. It's like a living part of the organization, right? You go to the website of a company, you see the product of the company. But when you're getting emailed, when you're getting messaged on LinkedIn, when you've got all of these messages coming at you, you almost start to personify a brand. And
totally.
so, if somebody's just constantly nagging you or sending you conflicting messaging, you lose trust in that person, and you feel like you're not being respected. And so, this importance is showing respect to your end users. And they may not, I think that we maybe appreciate really good marketing more than a non-marketer buyer, but they will definitely feel the negative side of it. So
yeah, totally. I forgot my last tip, but if there are chances to do so, consolidate the reliance on one channel alone. So if you can take things like, instead of doing batch and blast emails, figure out how you can send like newsletters that are amazing. That's even better, I think, for a prospect and customer. If you can move a bunch of communications to a login page that a customer needs to find out about, especially for your active customers, put it there. If you can do more in-app messaging rather than sending out a bunch of email and it's targeted and to the people that really need that message, do that. Figure out ways to be less reliant on an overused channel, but then also that focus means it's probably being delivered to the right people instead of just like batching and blasting everyone that you think should be getting that message.
Yeah.
So just want to lead with that too.
Love that. Fantastic. Well, Crissy, thank you so much for joining to talk about this today. For all of our listeners who have made it this far, just, once again, if you are trying to tackle this problem around communication, orchestration, some of our tips today, first of all, start with documenting what you currently have. This is where you're going to be able to really highlight the pain points and really escalate that to your leadership team to make this an important project to focus on this year. After you've documented it and gotten that executive buy-in, align with your teams and assign ownership to all of these tools and make sure that you get it all collected into a single space. After you've been able to see this as a collective team, work on building those rules of engagement. So that way, you know exactly what team is responsible for what type of communication and when. And then finally, what you're going to want to do is decide on how those rules of engagement are brought out to the rest of the team and enabled for the rest of the team, whether that is on calendars or simply documenting what a standard flow would look like for a brand new prospect. Make sure that you give that transparency to the people who are communicating directly with your customers, because they're going to have more buy-in on those rules of engagement that you established. You do that, and you're going to have a ton of wins this year, building out the best customer experience that you can for your buyers and customers. Thank you so much for listening. This has been the Forward Thinking Podcast. If you've enjoyed the podcast, please do give us a review. It definitely helps us get this message in front of more people. Thank you very much, and have a great day.